Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Joshua Kellard, who has been in the Arise conference, and today he's here to discuss the government's proposals for a digital ID. Thank you, Joshua, for taking time to come and speak to us today. We're going to be breaking down um, why this is important for us as believers to know what's going on and what we can do about it. Um, it's so good for you to take this time to educate us and to think to make everyone aware of what the government is doing. They are committed to creating a mandatory digital ID for all citizens. Can you tell us about that? What does that mean?
Yes, absolutely. Good to be with you, Emma. And thanks for all you're doing at Arise and in various other capacities for families around the country. Yes, digital ID has been put on the agenda. It came into public view, particularly on the 26th of September this year. Interestingly, 2 days after a report had appeared on the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change website entitled "Now is the Time for Digital ID." So there's maybe a clue there in terms of some of the influence behind Keir Starmer's decision. Um, Politically interesting timing because, as you probably know, and as our listeners will probably know, Keir Starmer is not doing well in the polls at the moment. He is an unpopular leader who still has uh, about 3 years in office. So what he hopes to do is to implement digital IDs before the end of that parliamentary term. And these will essentially be pockets of information that the state maintains and keeps, but which are accessible from your phone. We don't know a whole lot of the detail here. We don't know, for example, how this digital ID will be read out for those who don't have smartphones. But this is what the Tony Blair Institute report says. It says in the background, a digital ID should link information held by different government bodies about the same person without moving the data or without creating a single large database. So that's the key. It's the government that has information on a person, and that information is crucially shareable between all government agencies. That's what we're looking at here.
So there's huge implications there of GDPR.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean,
it's just like there's no GDPR. It's just like let's just you're basically saying you can just go to everywhere my name is and read my information. Is that essentially like on a
that,
government like yeah, so NHS, um social security, universal credit tax, HMRC,
mm,
all these places will be then linked using your digital ID.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Something, is there going to be a vote in Parliament about this?
So I imagine that there will be, well, what the government has said is there will be consultation on how to implement this. We have to remember our Labour government has a vast majority. So in theory, they can pass pretty much anything they want because of that majority.
Yeah.
Um, they have to consult, but as with so many government consultations, this will be a how do we do this, not should we do this, because
Yeah.
they know an unpopular policy.
Yeah. The government has said that this is important to tackle illegal immigration and crime. And a lot of people say, oh, that's a good thing. Illegal immigration is a big hot topic. Um, is this the case? And will this make our lives safer or easier?
So two questions there. First of all, the reason given. The reason given for policy, of course, needs to be considered and weighed by the informed citizenry. That's us.
Mhm.
We need to think through whether or not what we're being told about the reason for a policy is really the true motivating factor. So, I mean, I think many people know that we don't have a problem in this country so much with tracking illegal immigrants as with finding ways to deport them and to solve this problem that we have with our immigration system, which is broken
Mhm.
essentially. Um, so the proposal is this is going to help track and spot illegal immigrants. The problem, of course, is it's relying on, and what we should have said is the government has said at first This will not be mandatory for everyone, but if you want to work in the UK, you must have this ID. Now, of course, in a sense, that's splitting hairs because the same government wants to get everybody, including mothers with young children, as we've discussed on many occasions, into work. So it's going to affect every adult as the government sees it eventually. But basically, illegal immigrants who are here in this country are already working in contexts where their employers are not going to check their papers. So it's not going to solve that problem at all. They're going to have to rely on other measures if they're serious about cracking down on illegal immigration. And I think, as we can all see, we're not silly. We can see that what the government's really struggling to do is to make decisions about how to deal with illegal immigrants. Other countries don't struggle in this area as much as ours do. I think the second thing on this topic is Labour is a progressive, globalist-oriented party. It it doesn't really believe in borders, not at its core, not in its heart. And so it seems as if, to many people, Labour are turning on the electorate who are concerned about immigration and saying, okay, you want us to deal with borders, you're going to have to accept this, which is what we want to do. We've wanted to do it for a long time since Blair. It's a bit of a slap in the face, I think, for the average voter.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It's very interesting you started off talking about the Tony Blair Institute because this is not a new policy. I think a lot of people are like, what, where did this come from? It seems a bit left field. That suddenly this is something that they've committed to doing within this their term in government. And for younger adults, they might be a bit like, oh, this is new, but it's really not new for us of a certain age who remember Tony Blair's time in government. This was something he was really keen on implementing 25 years ago.
Mhm.
He wanted to introduce digital ID. And as you just said, the Tony Blair Institute, that paper that came out 2 days before Keir Starmer's announcement, was all about digital ID. So this is not a new Labour policy at all, which then brings us to why are they so keen to introduce these kind of controls on their citizens?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I didn't know this prior to researching for this episode, but actually, John Major consulted on whether or not to introduce ID cards. So even
Oh, I
before Blair, but Blair took it up with gusto.
yeah,
And of course, Blair is a committed globalist. He wants to see global institutions thriving. He wants to see laws passed and governance effected at a global level. The extent to which he believes in sovereign nation states is, I think, an open question. So yes, why do governments introduce these kinds of controls? Well, I mean, first of all, I think there's a real issue after the Enlightenment in terms of where authority comes from. I mean, human history has always had some level of social control exercised from some department. In a God-fearing society, we know that no human authority is absolute because only God's authority is absolute. So there's a higher law to which human laws have to be subject. Post-Enlightenment, when the nation state kind of rejects God and divine law and a biblical foundation for law, what we have is the state cut loose, and inevitably there's a power vacuum there. So we have to have another absolute authority. Enter the absolute monarchs, enter the absolute rule of the government generated after the French Revolution. That's the age in which we live. We live in a post-Enlightenment age where states do not recognize proper limits to their power. So but however, in the best scenario, I think governments introduce this because they're idealists. They believe the world can be a better place if only their legislative agenda was implemented. I mean,
yeah,
and unfortunately, politics tends to attract a certain kind of person, and that's the certain kind of person who thinks that they know how society should be governed and that the operations of the state are the means to do that. So there's a fundamentally progressive drag to politics. Worst scenario is you have governments that remove all the impediments to their will, all of the traditional ways of slowing down the utopians and the idealists, and they're then able to introduce control any which way they want. Interesting. I think the Bible warns us about this in 1 Samuel chapter 8, where the people of Israel reject God, and the prophet Samuel says, Okay, are you really sure about this? Because these are going to be the ways of the king who will reign over you. And I'm reading here from Samuel. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards, through taxation, through all these things. The king will want to rule, in other words, and his rule will not be as beneficent as God's own rule, because God is faithful and loving and generous in a way that human kings often very quickly show that they're not. So,
And
yeah,
human kings change. You
yeah,
might
yeah,
have a good king or a good prime minister, a good president who has good things
yeah,
in place and good ideologies, but then the king after him, the president after him, the prime minister after him may not be good, and
that's right.
but those power structures are in place, and you're kind of, well, that you're stuck. That's who you've got ruling over you, and
That's
that's
right. And that's why traditionally we've had checks and balances, why democratic societies have reached for ways to make sure, even if a king goes bad, he can't do much damage. And those checks and balances are formal and informal. Sometimes they have to do with the law. Sometimes they have to do with things that need to be gone through, procedures in government. And sometimes they have to do with things like church and family and privacy, ideas that we treasure because they mean that the king doesn't direct every part of life. Totalitarianism is impossible if you have a thriving civil society with its own rules and spheres and interests. Yeah.
So the argument around digital ID is actually quite philosophical. It's
Mhm.
very you're looking at very deep ideas of control and who's in charge and who makes and what kind of society we actually want. Because depending on where your political allegiance lies, you might think, oh, Keir Starmer's not that bad. He might not be the most competent prime minister, but hey, he's not evil. But if you've got some people might think, oh, he's awful. He's really wicked, and that's depending on where you go. But if you think about it globally, he's
Yeah.
not Hitler. Is not Stalin. Is but he's, as what you said, he's got things that he wants to do, and he believes the best way to do it is the digital ID. And
Yep.
if he believes it's going to solve his immigration problem, that you might be a little bit delusional because there's other you can't work without a national insurance number. If you're a legal immigrant, you don't get a national insurance number.
Yep.
So I really don't see how this changes that. But even if Keir Starmer, best of his intentions, he wants to do something he thinks is going to be good, the problem is this philosophical shift in
Mhm.
the state and the citizen.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah.
and this puts a mechanism in place where the state can bring more control over private citizens that the state really shouldn't have. Would you say that's true?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think many philosophers have understood that knowledge is power. Um, and that's why abusers, for example, as we all know, will um, try to make sure that knowledge of what they're doing doesn't spill over. They're absolutely obsessed about control of knowledge and information flow. But going back to the earlier point about sort of checks and balances, yeah, you're right. This is a philosophical point. It's also a theological point as well. Um, as Christians, I think we have in the scriptures a very clear vision for what the purpose of the state is.
Mhm.
Um, and you can go back to Genesis 1. What does God do? He divides things from one from another, light and darkness, night and day, land and sea, waters above the expanse from the waters below. There are distinctions which safeguard the boundaries of things. And we've always understood that something that is defined is understandable. And God defines things in Scripture. He defines the context for having children as marriage. He defines the genders. He defines what the church is, what the state is. We could go to passages like Romans 13, the classic passage on what the state is. And traditionally, Christians, evangelicals, have been very clear. We've had what's called a doctrine of the civil magistrate. I'll just read you an example of that. This is the Baptist Confession of 1689. Right after the Reformation, the churches knew they had to just set out what the scriptures taught. And this is what they said by way of summarizing what the government is for. It says that God, the supreme Lord and King of all the world, hath ordained civil magistrates to be under him over the people for his own glory and the public good. And to this end hath armed them with the power of the sword for defense and encouragement of them that do good and for the punishment of evildoers. Now, the tragedy of our day, because we've rejected God, is that the state has now assumed the position of the ultimate authority, and the state insists on being undefined. It doesn't regulate itself anymore. It doesn't say, yes, we recognize this is the limit of the state. Here's our scope. It's justice, and it's justice alone, and we're going to self-limit in other areas. As you know, Emma, we live in the UK, which is a statist country. We believe, on paper at least, that the state should have a department for education. It should be in charge of children effectively. It should be running our health service. It should be running our economy with very involved manipulation of our finance. It should be seeing effectively what we have in HMRC is increasingly an all-seeing eye on every financial transaction. We have an undefined, unlimited, and unself-regulating state. I say it's a tragedy because I think without any appeal to a higher law, without self-limitation, we de facto have a form of principled totalitarianism. Now, it may not be completely authoritarian, but in principle, on paper, the state runs every department of life. And it takes care of us from cradle to grave, whether or not we want it to. We can't opt out of paying taxes into this system. And there's a certain logic to digital ID. If the state already means this much to us, and if we're under its thumb from cradle to grave, well, why shouldn't it have all our data? And yes, it's the British state after all. We're the British. How bad can we really be to ourselves? Trouble is, the wisdom of the ages is against us there. As soon as you open these doors, break down these barriers, the flood will come in. It's just the movement of water finding its balance.
It's very interesting and it's alarming, but it's something we're a bit like the frog kind of boiled slowly. We don't really, it's hard for us to see outside of our own little bubble because we've lived in it. We're so used to it. We're used to having the NHS. There's the only people that probably very elderly people would maybe remember before the time of the NHS. We all know about it. It's that cradle to grave, and the only thing in life that are one of the only things in life that is certain is our taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you've looked into or aware of the whole making tax digital thing that's happening as well. So this is something I've been doing a lot of research just for personal taxes. This idea that the HMRC are really doing a push to make tax digital, and when you dive into that, you really see the connection with digital ID. So the making tax digital is that all taxation, all your tax returns, everything will be digital. It'll all be kind of hooked in. Tax returns are becoming so complex, you need software that integrates. For businesses, need software to integrate with their bank accounts, with their different financial systems that then feed into the HMRC's systems. And so we're getting to that point where you just said that that idea of the HMRC having complete oversight and view into all our financial transactions, that is becoming a reality for businesses very, very quickly. And it's probably a matter of time before it kind of trickles down to citizens because it is this very big, it's a monolithic type of structure, the HMRC, which is
Yeah.
quite impenetrable. And the interesting thing, back to something you said right at the beginning, if you go to research the government's policy on making tax digital, which is happening now, is being implemented now, their guidelines and the information about the how it works is very, very vague.
Mhm.
And the digital ID, how does it work? As you said, the details are very, very vague,
Mhm.
which should be alarming to everyone. When the government's doing something, says you have to do this, but it's not easy for the your average citizen to roll up and like, oh, I see what you're doing, I understand that, and we can't understand it. That's something we should be worried about.
Yeah, absolutely.
For From a Christian perspective, you already touched on this, but on a very basic kind of perspective, for your average believer who
Mm.
they're just living their life and trying to do the best, honor God. Um, what should they be worried about? What or concerned about with this legislation?
Yeah, I think it's necessary for us to be realistic. A lot of people, I was talking to a chap yesterday, a friend who's a good man, who didn't see any issues at all with digital ID. His perspective was, hey, it's going to make everything easier. All the things I already do, just going to be that much more streamlined, won't have to fill in forms twice. And there was a basic implicit trust in the goodness of the state. And trust is a good thing. It's good to be think the best of other people. Um, the trouble is, we've got to be discerning. We've got to realize that there are some changes in the way that our society functions that can't be rolled back. The ratchet only goes up one way. And I think it's here that we must be people of clear principle. And the principle is very simple. The principle is that the government limits itself to public justice and righteousness. It has no mandate to mediate all of our relationships. It has no mandate from God to see everything that's going on in our society. And we have a state that doesn't recognize that. We have a state that wants to know, for example, it regards children who may not be known to the authorities, but who are loved and cared for and protected in their families. It regards them as invisible children. Well, they're far from being invisible. They're loved and known by their families and in their local communities. But it's this mindset. And I would say to a Christian, um, you have a principled reason to be concerned about this because the state only has the right to know about what it has a right to take action on. And in terms of what God has given to the government and to the state, it's really to protect those who do good and to punish those who do evil. It is not to mediate all relationships. And the second thing I would say, um, and let me go off on one here, Emma. um, at times like this, when you have a somewhat Orwellian development in government, digital IDs classic, people start to think about apocalyptic topics and the end of time. And very quickly, Christians, as soon as you talk about, subjects like the Antichrist or the apocalypse, people kind of laugh, they brush it off, they're unserious about it all. I've been challenged this past couple of weeks that Christians often are not paying sufficient attention to the scriptures, especially when it comes to the end times. Now, there are things that are murky and difficult where Christians can disagree. So, for example, the millennium. I'm not sure that debate is going to be solved anytime soon. It's just a tricky area. It's difficult texts. But one area where the scriptures are exceedingly clear and where there should really be no debate is that there will one day be a one world government that is hostile to Christ. The scriptures talk about this in multiple places when it discusses the Antichrist. So the four key texts that I would encourage all who are listening to this to consult would be Daniel, particularly chapters 11 and 12. Read through Matthew 24 again, go to 2nd Thessalonians chapter 2, and read Revelation 13, 14, and 15. These are four chapters which very clearly feed into one another, and they tell us where things are heading. and they talk about the Antichrist. Now, anti does not in this case mean against Christ, although he is against Christ, but it means instead of Christ. He sets himself up as a replacement for God. And a few things that emerge from these passages are that there will be a satanically inspired human being who seeks domination and who is granted domination over the world. He is given authority, Revelation 13 tells us, over all tribes, peoples, and languages. In other words, he's given authority that rightfully belongs to Christ for a time. Again, the times are very specific in these chapters. It's 3.5 years at the end of history, 42 months, 1,290 days that he's given dominion. And then we're told in Revelation 13 that this man, who is in that chapter called the beast, will be helped by what is sometimes called the false prophet. And that's where we get the classic passage. I'll just read it to you. That this second beast, the false prophet, causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of the man, and his number is 666. Now, this is the word of God, in which he has revealed to his saints what we ought to be watching for in the end of days. Now, I think there is reason to believe that this happens when the full number, when the world, essentially the Great Commission has taken place, because during this time, the Great Tribulation, when the Antichrist reigns, it will be difficult to do world evangelization. But it's interesting that he takes an interest in commerce. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that Keir Starmer's digital ID, that Keir Starmer is the Antichrist, or that his digital ID is even a prototype for what the Antichrist and the two beasts will do. But I think that if we're reading the scriptures, we are mindful of this, that is still ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
That this is what things look like before the dawning of the great day when Christ comes and the kingdom of this world, that's the kingdom the Antichrist wants and is given for a time, becomes the kingdom of our God and of his Christ. And I think we can expect a number of things to be happening leading up to that. And one is we should expect to see globalist policies taking hold of the imagination of politicians who don't love God. People will reach for global solutions to what are considered to be global problems. They will oppose the idea of limited power. I think we'll also see that there will be measures put in place to limit who can trade. And that will, I assume, because the Antichrist comes with his own value system, that will be tied to certain accepted behaviors and opinions. I think we can anticipate that will come. Mechanisms of identification tied to commerce. Those are things which, at least in foreshadow, I think, what will be fully realized during a very difficult time in our future. And there'll be lots of flattery. The one thing that's said about the Antichrist again and again is he will flatter, he will seduce, he will deceive, and he will perform great signs. And it's not unimaginable that there could be a coming together of powerful technology and very powerful supernatural signs. In fact, C.S. Lewis says that the root of science and the root of magic are the same. They're the grasp for control. So what I want to caution Christians against is a scoffing attitude that says, as soon as we're thinking about these themes, well, don't mention the Antichrist, don't mention the apocalypse. No, God has revealed to his saints things that we need to know for the future. And if we just shrug those things off and don't heed the directions in which things are going, I think we're being naive. Even worse than that, we're disregarding God's revelation. So thank you for letting me go off on that one. But I really think these things should be in our minds, not in a way to scare us, but we need to discern the times in which we're living so we can know how to be faithful here.
I absolutely agree, because it's what you said about the ratcheting up. It's one of these things, they ratchet it up, but there's no going back. Nobody's going to, the state does not give power back. Once it doesn't.
Yeah.
once it's in place, is even if you had a government few years down the line, you have another prime minister who's against it. The mechanism is going to be so entrenched in all the systems of governments. It's going to be no, it's going to be too expensive to then disentangle everything and remove a digital ID. Once we've got it, we have it.
Yep.
And it's about this. It's desensitizing us. It's making it normalized.
Yep.
Um, our children, if it gets passed, our children will grow up where it's absolutely normal for them to have a digital ID. They won't bat their eyelids at the idea of the government holding that data about them from multiple agencies and it being spoken about, shared between those agencies.
Yep.
And then when you marry it with other technologies, it's not a massive stretch of the imagination to where that can go. And for anyone who is aware of what happens in China
Hmm.
with private data, you end up entering the world of credit scores where
Hmm.
the government holds personal data of Chinese citizens and they're given scores depending on whether they're good citizens or bad citizens, and that limits the freedoms that they can then have, what they can do, where they can go, what they can just what they can do, the schools they can send their kids to, the jobs that they're allowed, and it's all locked into a government system where they've got their digital IDs and their citizens are monitored.
Hmm.
And you're putting the digital ID takes technology which is available and brings it to the UK. And obviously that's not going to happen here, but you've then put in a system which could happen in the future if it's not immediate. And it's that again pushing and pushing back what we see as being okay with our relationship between the state.
That's right. I mean, I think we can even go further. We can already say that the government has intended uses for this digital ID that go beyond just employment. And I think we can see this actually in relation to the Children's Wellbeing Bill currently being passed in
Where we're
Westminster.
coming to next.
Yeah, indeed. Well, the Children's Commissioner has said, the Children's Commissioner for England, I should clarify, because there's one for Scotland too. Um, she has said that she wants wraparound services for each child. That's her phrase, wraparound. Now that makes me think of a boa constrictor. You know, who wants their child wrapped around? Um, but she sees a common identifier, which is her word for young people's digital ID, to be the way in which the state sees every child. Now, I even the language of seeing every child there, you're seeing a child not in terms of the balance of their personality, but selected data points about which you want to then action things in their life. You know, it's going to be a very, so to speak, autistic way of seeing the child. It's going to be very limited and it's going to be very selective. But she's already saying we need this data so we can wrap around each child. Well, uh, I think that's absolutely the intention as well with other forms of digital ID. Why wouldn't it be? But of course, here's the thing. Like central bank digital currencies, we don't need digital ID. All of its possible functions in terms of the benefit to us as a people can be done in other ways. I mean, for goodness sake, since the dawn of the world, every generation that has walked this earth has done okay without digital ID.
Yeah.
I mean, Shakespeare thrived without it. So did Johann Sebastian Bach. And we don't need it today.
No.
Um,
And I think that what you said about the children's bill is really key. Just say that there has been a massive backlash in the nation about digital ID.
mm,
Is the petition against it just blew up. It went viral. Is the huge backlash. Big figures have come out and said, well, basically, over my dead body will I get a digital ID. People like Boris Johnson said, I will never get a digital ID. You've got big names that are saying absolutely no. The Children's Wellbeing Bill is one of these under the radar things which has got a lot of cross party support and has not had the same backlash because it's all kind of in that language of we need to keep children safe. But as you said, that identifier is a digital ID, which
Mm.
will be given to every child. So if we don't give it for this or the adults in the nation, that generation of children coming up will automatically have a digital ID assigned to them from birth.
Yeah.
So they've got two pieces of legislation they're bringing together because they really, really want to bring this to pass.
Yes.
If not with us, with our children, because
Yes.
a childhood is not that long,
No.
and then you've got a new load of adults who are perfectly happy with it because they've grown up having a digital ID.
Yeah.
So why not just make it for everybody? And these older people who are like middle aged and grumpy, they they don't know what they're talking about because
Yeah.
we're modern and we're going to do things a modern way, and so it is very much on the agenda
Yeah. Yeah.
of government through whatever means they have. Interestingly, the mechanisms that the government are kind of building for this are being built by companies that have close links with the Tony Blair Foundation and have had links with him for many, many years. So again, we're coming back to Tony Blair and the globalist
Yeah.
policies.
And just on that, a very good interview to watch is the Unheard expose of the Tony Blair Institute. Be of interest to listeners.
I will
Yeah.
link that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So we've talked an awful lot about different aspects, philosophical bits of it.
Hmm.
Some of them probably quite scary for a lot of people to listen to, and it's also it can almost be it's be to take it seriously can create a lot of fear.
Hmm.
Where scoffing is like, oh, it doesn't matter. That's maybe a bit of a defense mechanism against having to really look at some of these things in the Bible which we don't really want to have to live through. We see them in the Bible. We'd rather not be the generation that has to deal with these sorts of things. Um, but burying your head in the sand is not going to make them go away.
No.
What things can we do practically about this?
Yeah. I think there's a lot we can do practically. But I think the first thing is to live close to God, you know. Um, the fact is that the book of Daniel contains some of the scariest prophetic utterances in the Bible in terms of um, future leaders who will persecute God's people and who will wield extraordinary power. And the book of Daniel is where we see God taking Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of this massive empire, and turning him essentially into an animal for a season. We're reminded again and again until he confesses that the Most High rules over the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And that's our assurance, even in the darkest days of the great tribulation to come. Christ is coming back for his bride, and he's going to send out his angels at the end of the great tribulation to gather his elect from the four winds. That's our assurance. Our conquering king comes back. He doesn't leave us, even in that darkest of times. And we're not there yet, obviously. Um, yeah, and we're reminded in Isaiah 49. There's a great prophecy that this, of course, in context is relating to God's care for Israel and His ability to bring them out of the nations. But it says in Isaiah 49:24, "Can the prey be taken from the mighty, or the captives of a tyrant be rescued? For thus says the Lord, even the captives of the mighty shall be taken, and the prey of the tyrant be rescued. For I will contend with those who contend with you, and I will save your children." Now, that's a lovely thing to be reminded of, that ultimately we think we care about our kids more than anyone. That's not true. It's just not true. Our Father in heaven cares about our children more than we do. We've got to not be intimidated. And I really think Christians we need to wake up, obviously, to the society that does want to take our children, no doubt about it, hearts and minds. Satan hates our kids and he wants to see them fail and apostatize and turn from the Lord. But there is one who cares for them who is far stronger than we. We need to wake up to our duties, particularly our duty to educate our children and to lead them and to protect them and to guide them. But when our powers fail, and they may sometimes fail, we look to the Lord. So we need to walk closely with Him. That's very practical. That's the most practical thing I can suggest. Um, And we need to worship the Lord. We have to remember that what we're ultimately facing here is a threat to our worship. Are
Mm,
we going to put all our trust and our confidence in the state and its promises, which are empty and rubbish at the best of times? Or are we going to trust in the Lord, who's the only one who's truly authorized to see everything because he cares for us? So let's trust him. Let's worship him more than we have done before. Let's worship the Most High, who rules the kingdom of men, make his praises louder. And then practically, I think we need to live, it sounds like a soundbite, but we do need to live in our freedoms. We have a window now where we do have relative freedom. What are we doing with it? Are we reaching out to the lost? Are we teaching our children? Are we worshiping the Lord? Are we building his church? Are we found faithful? And then there are political actions too. Um, you can sign petitions. There are a number of important petitions we can link to on
mm,
the back of this. But I would encourage people to see that as a long-term investment, to develop relationships with councillors and MPs and MSPs where they can, and not to be alone, to gather with others who are like-minded and talk about these things. It can be very disheartening sometimes when we hear Christians who are our brothers and sisters who just don't seem to see it. And there we just need to be faithful. We need to remember that very often God's people are in a minority of a minority on things like this. And we need to be careful not to be judgmental. It's often a temptation for me to be frustrated and judgmental when others don't seem to see what I take to be the blindingly obvious. Got to guard our hearts, make sure we're loving people on that. But then passive resistance. Christian theology teaches us that when the state commands what God forbids, and when the state forbids what God commands, we are to resist it. And the scripture also teaches us where the boundaries of the state are. And if the state demands digital ID from us, it's absolutely crossing those boundaries. And I think not only for our own sake, but for the sake of our neighbor in love, we need to refuse to comply. What the state wants us to do is to obey in advance, to obey without understanding the detail. Um, Interestingly, the scriptures, I believe, do not teach us to obey the state. They teach us to be in subjection to its authority. And those two things are different. You can be in subjection to the state, wanting to obey its legitimate teaching and legislation, while also refusing some of the things that are extreme and unwarranted by God's calling. So, yes, I would say to people, consider your own life, consider your sufficiency as a family. Think about your home economy, and if there are ways that you can become more self-sufficient as a family for your own good, and so you can share with others, think about all those things. Think about ditching your smartphone. Think about going back to devices that only do one thing. All of these things can be part of our general approach to maintaining and to living in our freedoms.
yeah, ditching smartphone is an act of resistance.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, that yes, that's really challenging. Interestingly, speaking, it can feel really intimidating going to a counsellor or an MSP, MP to talk about things because you think, oh, they'll know so much more than me. I don't really understand it. They're actually really they're really open to speaking to people. They enjoy when their constituents come and speak to them, and you will often find that their understanding of a topic may not be as broad as you may expect it to be. They've been told the party line, and that whole philosophical idea about the role of the state. A lot of MPs probably haven't really delved deeply into that. They're just thinking,
No.
"Oh, this is a good idea. We can see why this is a good idea. It solves a lot of practical bureaucratic problems." Well, yeah, and everybody thinks of themselves as being the good guys. We're the good guys. We're not wanting to do anything evil and bad. We're just trying to help the
Oh, yeah,
nation
absolutely.
function. And so they're not so speaking to them as on that basis of they are people who are actually they're thinking they're doing something good and come and say, well, actually, have you thought about the implications here?
Yeah.
And it's not so much what your government wants to do, but future governments. You've just given a potential future prime minister who's not a good guy a whole load of power that they really shouldn't have.
Yes. And talk about their political opponents. Would you like this person to have those powers?
Yes, yes. Would you like Nigel Farage to have the power
Uh,
you're about to give him?
that's the name that most politicians will respond to these days. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And this is where a basic education in civil liberties, the history of democracy is a history of limitations and roadblocks deliberately put in the way of leaders who go bad.
Yeah.
But this is also partly the depressing thing, because someone who thinks that they're doing the right thing is often intractable.
Mm-hmm.
And so C.S. Lewis has a great quote. He says, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies." And that's our challenge, because increasingly politics is a game for omnipotent moral busybodies who believe they know how we ought to order our lives and want to build us into a system that we can't opt out of anymore, in which we're not sufficient of ourselves anymore, that we're dependent on a system. And so, yes, talking to MSPs, talking to MPs, and not being discouraged. I think also, Emma, to be honest, I think we're moving into an era where unjust laws will increasingly be passed.
Yeah.
Laws that require of us a response that's different, that's outside of the political process, and where we must have our principles arranged. I don't talk about civil disobedience because I don't think we're actually called to civil obedience. I think we're called to civil subjection. But I do talk about principled resistance. We must be people of principle, and not simply that we believe in any freedom. No, that's not it. We believe in loving God and loving people. And freedom is only important to the extent that it enables us to love God and love people and be who He's called us to be. And that's why tyranny is so bad, because it gets in the way of our relationship with God and our relationship with other people.
Yeah.
So that's why we oppose it.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up and just say, please do be praying about this whole area. Ask God for wisdom. The Bible said these things require wisdom. Ask God for wisdom. God promises us if we pray, He will give us wisdom. And meet with people, other believers, to pray about this together. The world is changing at a very alarming rate and changes that will affect everybody. And it can feel very worrying. And of course, there's going to be an element where it's going to trigger fear in us, but God tells us, do not fear. We put our trust in Him. So, yeah, pray, connect with God, speak to your representatives, and really get, as Josh said, getting close to the Lord
Mm.
to help Him walk with you through the days and weeks, months, years ahead,
Mhm.
and how to also disciple our children to do the same. Thank you so much, Josh,
Amen.
for your time. This has been excellent. We'll put links for petitions in the notes, and links to just information about the proposed bill, and also an article that Josh wrote for Banner of Truth about the state and Romans 13 as well, which is full of really interesting information about how to view that from a theological perspective. Thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for all you're doing, and speak to you soon.
Bye bye.